very much welcome to Youjuice Garage. As we said, Youjuice juicy chats only. Remember, whatever happens at Youjuice or it's been said at Youjuice stays at Youjuice, especially when we're recording. But whatever we've got to say today, I'm sure we'll be very happy to share with others. Very warm welcome to all of you guys. Thank you so much for dedicating your Monday evening to Youjuice and to me. Anil, we've known each other for a while. I remember when I think it was first time you came in, and we were like, I think you came on your own with the book, and it wasn't your book.
No.
It was and you were quite happy and peaceful. But then within probably 10 minutes, you were chatting to everyone. Maybe because you were forced to. But I think at some point you said, is it always like that in here? And I was like, yeah. But then I asked you a question. I was like, have you just moved in? And you said, no, we have a mutual friend who recommended you to Youjuice. And then I've asked you, what is it that you do? And you said, well, I'm a professor. I'm a brain scientist.
I probably didn't say I'm a professor. I turned on to start off with that.
You said brain. You didn't say that. I think I've asked you what sort of brain scientist. I'm a professor, and I was like, all right then. So I think you're the. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself rather than me doing a bad job in introducing. So what is that you do?
Well, I mean, first of all, thanks for hosting this. And yes, you're right. I discovered Youjuice, despite living in Brighton for many, many years. I discovered this place just about a year ago on a recommendation of a friend, and have been coming ever since. And it's partly for the juices and the food, and partly for the sense of community and the conversation. So it's pretty unique. And so happy to be here on a Monday evening as well. I am a neuroscientist, so I've spent my career studying how the brain works. The combination of different approaches, from philosophy to psychology to mathematics, computer science and AI. I first moved to Brighton in the 90s to do a master's and a PhD, and then was in the States for a bit in California, and somehow got lured back to Brighton in the mid-2000s. And since then I've been setting up a lab and working in a lab here. And the specific thing I'm interested in neuroscience is consciousness. So it's this everyday miracle by which we have all this stuff inside our heads, neurons and chemicals and all sorts of things. But somehow out of all this, our brains don't just move our bodies around. We have experiences. We open our eyes and there's a world. We taste some Youjuice and there's an explosion of flavour. It's not just nutrition going into our bodies. And this has been one of the biggest mysteries forever, right? How do you get matter? How do you go from matter to mind? From neurons to experience. There's no answer yet, but by focusing on this problem, it turns out you can really understand a lot about how consciousness happens, what happens when we lose it under anesthesia or in dreamless sleep, and when we are conscious, what we're conscious of, the world around us and the experience of being a self. And that's increasingly where my focus is going, on understanding the experience of being a human self, with the emotions, the moods, all the way up to this sense of personal identity and narrative.
Wow, well, we've got a lot to talk about then, because you are the brain scientist, and we've got brains, but we know very little, that's true, about our brains, but we'll get back to you. But thank you for the introduction. Paul, you're next. So Paul has been my customer for 10 years, and we became friends over the counter. And actually, I refer to Paul like my older brother, because he's been my mentor, my business mentor, and also a life coach for a long time. So I really, really value our friendship, and I just appreciate you as a person. And we also did some work together when you had several startups in Brighton. So I've also seen you as a boss of different teams and businesses. But tell us, what is that you do?
Thank you, and thank you for having me. by a process of deduction, I'm going to work out we've got brains, we've got
Yes.
beauty, I'm the brawn. I'm not sure where that leaves.
We all
where
use
that,
the same hairdresser.
You've got the ball. Yeah.
yeah,
We've all got that.
3 Bs.
it's going to begin with B. I have been a friend of the family, a friend of the Youjuice family for a long, long time. I moved down from London in 2014, and Youjuice was embryonic. It was an idea, I think, as much as anything. It was very early on in your journey, and I've been a part of it, watching it, helping you. It's been fantastic. I've been a customer, and it's been great to watch you grow and expand and contract, but actually work out what's really important for you. I think is what you've worked out, and what you've built. The testament to the community you built is. Youjuice shouts that. So I've been, it's been great being part of it. My role, what do I do? I'm a dad. I'm in my 50th year this year, which is exciting. 50 is the new 40. I would definitely say. I certainly don't feel that, and love kind of being down here in Brighton. I think you surround yourself with quite a lot of like minds that have made the leap out of the city and live here for better reasons than just earning money. I have 2 teenage children, married to Lizzie, and I spend my day consulting. I'm a builder, so I guess there is brawn, a business builder.
Yes.
I work in tech, and I'm currently involved in men's work. Is what I'm really, really passionate about. I'm building a business called Tribe, a platform for men to find their own path in life, to help the stigma around well-being, mental health, wellness, emotion, expressing emotion, being honest with yourself as a man is something that's been stigmatized, and I think it's something we'll probably talk about later today. So Tribe is my current venture, and I'm fueled by Youjuice.
Amen. Wow, thank you very much, Paul. John, we have met probably about, has it been like a year? Something
Maybe,
like?
yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
You just said before we started recording that when you first popped into Youjuice, you just, it came with a book or something, or you had an agenda, and then you were quite mesmerized by what was happening around you.
Yeah.
So actually you joined in, and I remember having first few conversations with you. Well, actually I remember all our conversations, but we had so much to talk about. You told me about your fantastic book, which you've written with Steve
Crawshaw.
Small acts of resistance. Or resilience?
Resistance.
Yeah. This is Eastern European, resilience, resistance, which I'm halfway through. It's a beautiful book, which actually has a really, really lovely stories. And of course, I could relate to some of the stories because you wrote quite a few stories about Poland. That's how our friendship started, our Juicy Chats.
Juicy Chats.
But tell us.
Well, again, thank you as well. This is it's going to be fascinating just to hear the backgrounds of your fellow guests here who I've started to get to know a little bit of. But this is one of the most unusual little places that I've been in Brighton for now I think 2 years with my family and my 2 young children, and we were talking about it earlier. We're DFLs down from London, probably causing a lot of trouble for local people. But I popped in here after the school run quite a number of months ago, and I had intended to kind of do a little bit of work on my phone, and I had a plan. But my plan kind of went out of the window in a really nice way, where I started noticing this, one person after another coming in, and you knew them all. Everyone shared a bit of a story. There was a real sense of community, which when I was younger, back in East London where I grew up, I kind of saw that, but I don't often see it as much these days. And so it was a very serendipitous, find for me. And we got talking, and I think I think one of the things that was a quick connection is the book that I wrote was very much inspired by Poland. But so the book was about, I used to travel around the world, often to areas of conflict for humanitarian organisations. and I was told to get stories which could be used for campaigns. And my work that I've ever done ever since has been about strategy, helping organisations achieve the change they want to see in the world, usually campaigning organisations and charities and stuff like that. But I started off going to these difficult areas where there's like often war or conflict, refugees, human rights abuses and stuff like that. And I would be asked to get stories which could be used for very good reasons for campaigns back in the UK. But what I noticed in a lot of these, the places that I went to, was there was incredible humour in these most difficult situations. Humour, ingenuity, creativity. And those stories really fascinated me, but they weren't the ones that I was assigned to bring back with my, commissioned photographer or film crew or whatever. And then years later, I thought, you know what? Why not put together a compilation of stories, not necessarily only ones that I've found, but that are out there, but are lesser known. And then Steve Crawsher, who's the co-author of the book, and the book's been around for quite a long time now, but he was the foreign correspondent in Eastern Europe. And I'd been to Poland a couple of times to do lobbying trips to the Polish government when I was doing stuff around Burma. And the story that I heard, which maybe I'll talk about later, there was 2 or 3 stories from Poland that were just funny and ingenious, and it was a real kind of people sticking fingers up at power, but in the most wonderful way. And so that's why I think when I met you and found out you were from Poland, it kind of was an immediate connection.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And this is actually the reason we're here today. My intention is to talk about men's mental health, because I think I've been observing for the last 10 years, different dynamics between me and my team and the customers, who are my friends, and how women communicate and how men communicate. And what's been quite significant is it's very different. But for me, it's such a pleasure to see that there is more and more lovely male customers who come in and actually open up and they start chatting. They have their juice and then they share a little bit of their worry or a story. And I wouldn't say offload, because it's not that. No one wants to come in and be in the therapy room at Youjuice, although some try. But I take it as a big achievement as a Youjuice collective, that we've created community safe enough for people to share. But the facts are pretty horrific. Like the suicidal is the biggest killer in men under 50. In this country, in Europe, I don't know about the entire world. You have a better statistics. And also what I read just before we started recording is that 50% of the men who committed suicide, there was no trace of like mental illness or a problem, which suggests that it hasn't been spoken about. So what's beautiful about this circle is that we all, between each other, have meaningful conversations, and we need more of those conversations as a community, as a nation, probably in the world as well. So this was my angle. Should I say that? That's probably the right thing. So this term, man up, what is it? Have you been told that as a young boy? Man up.
Probably not that I remember, to be honest.
Good.
No.
No?
Not in that exact phrase. There may have been the odd occasion where someone, would have told you to, be stronger in a particular way, but not necessarily that phrase. But yeah.
Okay, not be emotional, or really,
stop crying.
Stop crying.
Yeah.
It's funny, isn't it? Because women, we're not told we're okay with expressing our emotions, and some would say we speak more than guys. Questionable. Depends on what occasion, but that term always triggers me. When someone says, "Oh, man up, come on," it's such a expectation of what society, the cultural vibe, whatever it is.
I think there's stigma without question attached to male emotion. I think if I think of my father's father, He probably was involved in some degree with war, and emotion or feeling or was probably not really required at that time. And so that passing on through generation of, well, I don't need emotions, it's a weakness that's been passed on through the generations. So, but I do think things are changing. I do feel like things are changing. I think there's a positive shift going on. There's an increased awareness. There's an increased understanding that the statistics that you rightfully point out are just not acceptable, and that men are turning to one another. They're turning to family members, and there is a sense that man up, suppress emotion, don't show feelings is just not fit for purpose. I do think that's changing. We're a long way from it being probably where it needs to be, but there are outposts like Youjuice. I've sat here and I've watched men come in, huge burly men come off a building site maybe, and they're doing a 3-day cleanse. We're in a bubble. We are in Brighton, and would that be happening in other towns and cities up and down the UK? I don't know. We're slightly, there's a bias here, but it's good, little things like that, and coming in and talking more openly. That's so powerful and so important for men to be able to express emotion, and if it's a safe, even if it's a safe space like Youjuice, that's a good thing.
Yeah. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I imagine it's changing. I think interesting to compare. I think about my Indian family as well, where there's kind of a clear difference there between the women and the men in that family. I think the cultural restraints at least in my experience of India are even stronger than here.
For sure.
So there's a cross-cultural variation in it. But yeah, I think there's been a lot of positive difference. I think it's still, I don't know so much how much stigma there still is, but it still seems to be a little bit of a barrier to overcome. I remember, I've had in my life 3 episodes of pretty bad depression, not for quite a long time now. And critical to that was the decision to go and get therapy. And that was a hard decision. There was still something, I think, in my mind that was saying, you don't need that, you shouldn't need that. Not that I don't need that, but I shouldn't need that. And this was many, many years ago. And part of it was probably the therapy, but part of it was just a practice in talking, which I could then generalise to other situations beyond talking to the therapist.
Yeah.
Wow.
Feeling safe to express.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of okay, well that was all right. Nothing terrible happened. Maybe nothing good happened, but no terrible consequences to opening up and saying things like that. And then that made it just much easier to talk to other people. And now I don't really, from my perspective, I don't really differentiate between talking to men and women about how I feel. It's sort of equal. Yeah. But I can imagine that's because of the experience of having been through a certain amount of therapy over a decade ago.
And I think your cultural.
Right, I'm going to have to stop you there, guys. What is that? Might be a
fire alarm. Of course, it's a fire alarm. Why not?
I was just going to pick up on the cultural point about and talk about therapy. You look at countries like the US where it's almost built in.
Well, that's where I was. I was in California.
There you go. Well,
the leap was much lower.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. It's almost a badge. I don't know, that's the wrong language, but it's just what people do.
It was normal.
I think if you look here, and there's great platforms that have kind of risen quite quickly. And they're good and bad. BetterHelp is an example that's grown very quickly where people can get access to therapy. But I still think in this country, culturally, there's a reticence, there's a resistance to it, whereas it's just part of well-being and in say the US. I think there's work and stigma still around the word mental health. No one chastises physical health, it has a much more positive outlook, and mental health equally has a gamut or a range of points on a scale that actually working on your mental health is a positive. And so I think there's little things that are starting to chip away at some of those deeply held, misinformed kind of stereotypes, some of them. So it's good to see some positive change.
Well, you've got Alfie is 18 years old, right? Do you feel like the younger generation is way more open to conversation and more like aware of the importance of mental health?
I do.
To our generation.
I really do, actually. I think there's an openness amongst their peers that's more prevalent. I think the issue of mental health is endemic. It's almost a pandemic levels. Since the pandemic, I think in the workplace it's a huge problem that employers are having to deal with. But I think there's statistics around younger women, girls, really battling. But I look at Alfie compared to me. Alfie's my son. He's just turned 18, and there's an openness between him and his friends, I would say, that I didn't have, that I wouldn't have spoken in the way that he does with his friends, and that gives me hope. That gives me belief that things are changing. Without question, more needs to be done. But I in the workplace is something I've been exposed to. I kind of worked in corporates many years ago, then was feral for many years working for myself, then found myself in a company of about 150 people, and it was an ongoing challenge in workplaces of that size where you have numbers of employees that you are having to deal with. So it is a problem that's going to need to be dealt with, and I know we're kind of going to talk about work-life balance, but I do have hope.
I have watched you in your workplace, and we will talk about it. But what do you think about when I say men's health? What does it mean to you guys, Anil?
Men's health?
Men's health.
Well, I mean, there's many connotations to that, right? There's sexual health, which is one of them.
Yes.
But I don't know. I mean, I just mainly hear health. I'm not so sure that there needs to be, apart from in very specific instances, like, for instance, cures for male pattern baldness. That's definitely an element of male health.
Which we should
gave
talk
you that
about.
idea?
Usually specific to
How
one.
about men's mental health? Would that ring different bell? Is there a difference?
So the one thing that I struggle with when mental health is talked about as a subject is not that it's really important to find ways to support people and to help people who are struggling with mental health problems. But I mean, I often work in organisations who want to focus a bit on mental health, and often, for example, male mental health as well. But it kind of, there's an external environment, and there's pressures, real concrete pressures. We're living through a polycrisis at the moment, so people are either experiencing it directly or witnessing quite incredible stresses on everyday life. And people could be equipped to deal with that, more skillfully and better, and in a way that kind of helps them navigate through those difficulties. But if the fact is that's the reality of life, at some point people are going to either break or suffer or struggle. So I think if the environment doesn't change, if the shocks and the crises that exist, and more it seems, unfortunately, there's the dealing with people's ability to deal with it, but there's also the need to deal with the causes, and the causes are often very real. Apart from, I guess, and Anil will have a better idea. I'm sure there's stuff which is related to chemical imbalances or whatever it might be, something that's more kind of innate that affects someone's mental health. But it seems that in this country at the moment, there's a lot of people suffering real mental health pressures, but for really good reasons. The good reasons will not go away, just because you're meditating more, you're finding space, or you're talking to someone. It may help you to some extent to ameliorate your struggle, but the struggle will remain.
I think there's something really important what you're saying here, which is that there's one way to interpret mental health is basically to only ever have positive emotions, right? Always be happy, always never feel stressed or depressed or anything. And that, to me, that's not mental health. Sometimes feeling very low or very stressed is a very rational response to the situation you're in, and maybe a necessary response in order to figure out what to do next to change the situation. So I think a healthy mental life is one that involves the appropriate emotions and the ability to participate in the full range of emotional responses, rather than seeking to numb or nullify. And so this is where some of the, whether it's a prescription medication or whether it's a good bottle of whiskey, I mean, these things, both of them can be very nice in the short term. Both of them can work. And sometimes some medication may be necessary, but they're only ever catalysts so that you can change what's happening in your body or in your environment. That's ultimately responsible for the way you are feeling. And even then, there's a lot of debate now about standard, for instance, antidepressant medication. There's so-called serotonin reuptake inhibitors, Prozac. Everyone's familiar with these kinds of things. The evidence for them actually working is pretty mixed. They do work, but so do placebo effects, and a lot of it seems to be perhaps about how the act of taking something like that opens you up to the possibility of changing other things. So none of this is like, sometimes it's necessary to take. So a usual disclaimer for these kinds of conversations is take the medication you're prescribed by. This is not gonna override.
We're not sponsored here. We're not sponsored by Pfizer. Don't worry, guys. We're good. We're sponsored by Youjuice. I've asked about this question because to me, the fact that you coming to Youjuice is one way of taking care of yourself, right? It's not only having a juice, but it's putting the good in your system and giving the right nutrients, enzymes, and vitality to your body. And I love seeing now that there's more and more men coming to Youjuice, as you said, popping in, whether it's a builder or an artist or a banker, it doesn't matter. It's the same reason why people are here, because they want to feel well, and that for me is one way of self-care and putting the good stuff in the system. And I also feel like what I pick up on is it's very important to them to do that, to maintain their life balance. So whether it's a work-life balance, whatever it is, having that moment, coming in, having a smoothie, having a little chat, or just having a moment to yourself, while taking something good in, makes a difference. And hopefully people leave feeling better. So that actually brings me to my next question: is how you all three of you guys have you have young kids, you're creating a lot of stuff. I don't know how comfortable you feel about some of your new adventures, but I leave it to you. Paul, you have teenagers. You and Lizzie travel quite a bit, which is brilliant. You're also going to London on a regular basis. I mean, Anil, you're even.
Can't even start.
I want to see your air miles.
It's not good. I'm not proud of releasing this much carbon.
Well, listen, you're serving you're informing people about very important things. So I think we'll forgive you for traveling all over the globe. But all three of you have very busy work life. And how do you maintain your work-life balance?
I hardly work at all. That's the thing.
Oh, that's great.
So I mean, I partly joke, but about over the last 10 years, what I've tried to do, as best as I can, is I've made a trade-off, and that is to reduce my disposable income in order to get more free time. At least to the point where I can live a fairly normal life, but not have that much more that then consumes my time with things that I might not want to be doing. So I managed to do that, and that's allowed me to kind of almost decelerate the speed of time. So I have a lot more free time to do projects that I want to do, and I can spend time on them and feel a sense of fulfillment. Life doesn't kind of race, like with lots of moments, almost like pixels that never create a picture. And you don't remember, So life is quite fast at the moment. It feels like it's getting faster, and I've attempted to decelerate time, at least the way in terms of the way I feel it and perceive it. And so over the last decade, that's what I've tried to do, and had some success in doing it, which means I have fewer things that I'm involved in, but I'm involved in them in a kind of a way that I feel is more fulfilling and more fruitful.
Wow, that's beautiful.
And so things like social media, I came off that quite a few years ago. Now I do, I think, 2 to 3 hours of social media a month. But mainly because it's with organisations that I'm working with, so I need to kind of monitor what they're doing. But apart from that, that doesn't consume any of my time anymore. So I have my paid projects, I have my personal projects, like writing a bit of music or recording a bit of music.
Very good music.
And then the kids, and then walks, and then a bit of meditation or whatever it might be. But it's fewer moments that I can linger around. If that makes sense.
Oh. How about you, Paul?
Yeah, I echo some of that, definitely. I think it's really nice to hear. I thought I've been lucky, but actually I've crafted and created, and we are of an age that you can craft your week, how you work, where you work. I think work-life balance is something of the past for me. It's life balance, and work fits in at odd times. I'm lucky that I don't do a job that's in an office every day in the same place. I'm fortunate, but I've worked hard not to have to do that. So, very much agree about finding and creating time for life moments in the working week. But equally, I travelled yesterday to do some free work with people that I really like, and sat on a train and worked. And so it is about balance, but it's not saying work-life balance. It's finding balance between the things I love, that I love doing. We're slowly seeing the workplace change. It hasn't served us. The mental health crisis is in part due to the way people are forced to work. We're still working on kind of factory hours, and still training our children in factory mentality, and it's just not fit for purpose. There's so much change going on around us that allows people to become more nomadic in where they live and how they work, and technology's enabled that. It's good and bad. Totally agree. I haven't read a newspaper, listened to a radio program, or watched the news for about 4 years. It's created this beautiful space in my life.
Yeah.
This beautiful peace.
Do you need us to tell you what's going on in the world?
Sometimes it's unavoidable. It is
Yeah.
unavoidable, and sometimes you get in a taxi and you have to ask politely if they wouldn't mind turning it off. You hear about what's important, but I don't sit and consume my time. I was watching it with my children and just thinking, this is horrific. None of us need this in my life. It's a game show. It's a commercial game show that is self-serving. That wasn't the question. I was going down a rat hole there. Sorry.
No, it's great.
But it's about having that peace in myself, that I'm not. I found myself worried. I was a small business owner. The economy's doing this. Oh my God, it's going to be bad. I'm going back kind of 10 years, and it's really easy to get drawn into that. So removing myself from a lot of those systems that didn't and don't serve me has given me some of that peace and space.
That's interesting. I think I can say, so I'm impressed that you both managed to do that. And like social media, for instance, I totally agree. If you have the chance to step away from it, step away from it. Yeah, I mean, I don't, but this is partly because I still find it necessary for my job. But that may just be a story I'm telling myself. Same with the news, really. I mean, I think being able to step away from parts of it is probably a very good thing, because some of it is overemphasised, some of it just comes around. But at the same time, I feel a certain obligation to keep up with what's going on in the world, however badly news programs talk about that. But then again, I totally fail on the work-life balance question. I know that I have. The only thing that rescues it for me is that the work is something I really am passionate about, And so in one sense it doesn't feel like work, but nonetheless it is work, and I don't really ever put it down. Part of the problem has been this dual use aspect of the technologies we have now. So things that make it possible to work from home also make it impossible to not work from home. You know, email is on on my phone, so I can't just leave my email. I don't think it's factory hours. I think it's much worse than that. You know, it's very easy to be never off. I have to be very careful to remember to not send emails to people in my lab at the weekends, asking them to do something. You know, I assume and hope they don't feel pressure to do it at the weekends, but it's still corrosive to have these channels always, all the time. And because I'm often in different countries as well, then I can be doing Zoom meetings at any time of the day or the night because it's possible. So I think there's still a great challenge for how do we navigate this situation so we can make use of the flexibility, but without it imposing a huge cost. Like I've talked with the idea of just getting a second phone so I can have a work phone and a personal phone, but that seems an inefficient way to solve it. But it might be in the end the best thing to do.
Yeah, it's. I literally agree with everything you said, and I'm somewhere in between.
But we disagree with each other about a couple of things.
But this part, the work life, as you said, is a life balance. And what you said, that you feel like you failed in the work life balance, but actually, there is a say: do what you love, and then not one day you love what you do.
Well,
not one day is a work.
You do, but then you realise that actually, and this is another point that you made about just cutting down, not just the amount of time, but the number of things. It's very easy to give yourself a false sense of productivity just by rattling through your emails and being very quick to respond to things. But being quick to respond to things usually just means that somebody else responds even more quickly, and you just have more pseudo productivity going on. Trying to reserve time for actually working on the things you want to work on, which is what you're doing. But even within work, that's what I'm trying to figure out this year. So I'm going to stop doing a few things that were useful at the time, but now I think they make my work life a bit too disjointed, and I want to do something really valuable. It's going to take a long time, but it's easy to lose that time in just this illusion of I've done all these things today. I'm kind of up to date, but you'll never be.
Well, we're all learning, aren't we? Actually, we're all learning. You make a good point about actually we are always on, and what we're having to find, because the device is there, it pings, and we can all turn those things off, but it's still there. There's a compulsion, and I think it's establishing our own rules, boundaries, that we say that actually it is dinner time and we are together with family, or it's a Sunday. It's finding those rules and the boundaries that are right for you as an individual, that help maintain that peace and that space that I think is so missing if you let the tech or let what's possible take over your life.
Yeah, and I think especially for young people, even like children who have a device. I mean, I heard somewhere that when you have a child looking at a screen, there's the child looking at the screen. On the other side of the screen is a few thousand of the most brilliant engineers in Silicon Valley, whose job it is to ensure that child stays on that screen, keeps looking at the screen. And that is very asymmetric, right, in terms of the power of that device and the effect on that child. And I think it works on us as adults, so you can imagine how much more susceptible children are to those kinds of algorithms and techniques and stuff like that.
It's interesting that all three of you said the same about the social media, that it's more a negative, or it can be more negative than positive, because when I was doing a research for our chat, actually it was something like 35% of men said that they feel like they're worse off with on the mental health because of the social media, of what's shown. Now, what we're doing here now is we're doing the opposite, because we're using the social media as our channel, but we're spreading a very positive and a truthful picture information. So and again, even with this, it's such a balance because you can spend hours looking at things and not getting any information or getting totally wrong information, or you can just watch one thing, which might be life-changing.
Yeah. I love a TikTok recipe. I've recently discovered TikTok recipe. There's some gold in there.
Is it?
There really is.
I can't touch it.
So there's I know I'm in hallowed company, but there is good in tech. It's about boundaries and having a healthy approach to it. And I think people you kind of know when it's got unhealthy. We've recently, as a family, bought the Duolingo language. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I've never seen my kids, certainly my son, as engaged, because it gamifies the whole process. We're all competing with one another for gold bars and stuff as you go through the stages. So there's a balance, like anything in life.
But I don't think you do know. I think this is part of the insidiousness of it. I think in many cases it's difficult to be aware of quite how one is affected by these kinds of things until you, for instance, stop doing it.
Put away.
Wow, no, I didn't realise how much my mind was being consumed. And there are different ways to engage with it. I mean, I use social media more for broadcast purposes rather than for reading things, so that makes it, I think, much less of an aversive or dangerous experience. I put stuff out, I don't really care about what comes back, which is not the way, I guess, most people use it.
And I've worked with organisations who work on tech and its effects and stuff like that. And from the last things that I kind of recollect from the research is that girls tend to be much worse affected by social media, and particularly social media that has lots of comparison-related elements to it. Yeah, whereas boys tend to. On the whole, with the research, it suggests that boys use screens differently, and they use them for like games and stuff like that. Often stuff which isn't as corrosive. I don't know what it's like when they get older into young adults and what have you. But at least at the level of teens, girls seem to be much more adversely affected than boys because of the nature of the content. So it's not the screen in itself; it's the use of of the platforms and stuff like that.
I see my I was going to call them kids, I guess they are kids still, but they self-regulate as well, and that's really good to see. There are apps that they've installed that enforce time away, and they're aware, and I think hopefully it's work we've done already to let them know that what they're looking at is X or Y, but it's everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere. They can be there for hours on end, given a chance. So.
Do men or boys, young men and women communicate in a different way?
I think anecdotally, yes. Systematically, probably, but how necessary that is, I'm not sure. This takes us back to an earlier part of the conversation about what you were saying about the passed down from generation to generation, the importance of the idea of not communicating emotions. I think there probably are differences in communication. I think, mind you, some of the sort of deepest conversations I've had about my hopes, fears, worries, dreams, and so on have been with male friends, but not many of them. Not necessarily my longest standing friends either, but there's probably a little bit more of a shared understanding. You both maybe have faced more similar challenges, but it's a little harder to get to that point.
Okay, you need to dig deep to get the same.
I think the environments. I would definitely say we communicate differently. I think it takes a lot more for men to open up, and that's a sweeping generalisation. I think on the whole, be careful not to make sweeping generalisations. On the whole, I think it's harder to get men to open up about actually what's going on and what they're feeling. There's a really beautiful piece of content recently produced by Norwich City Football Club, I think it was, about male suicide. It's on YouTube. Very, very clever about the need for men to talk and to share, and it's a brilliant piece of content. You need to really see it. But places like the terraces, which is football terraces, are an outlet. There's a physiological act of opening up, of actually yelling and evoking energy and emotion, and it does work. It's an outlet, but that's maybe once a week at best. I think there are fewer opportunities where men get that chance to open up and let go and perhaps let off something that's blocking or held in them.
It's also that, they say men standing side by side and facing something, it makes it more difficult. It makes it easier for them to communicate when they're not looking at each other, when they're doing an activity or they're looking at football on a terrace.
Oh yeah, like the car drive.
Yeah,
the car journey is a good
it's
example
time to talk.
The walk and talk.
Yeah.
Which is probably the same actually for not just for men, but
No,
for
for
anyone who
everyone,
feels slightly uncomfortable. You're better off not facing each other and doing something or going somewhere.
Sometimes just different things come in when you don't actually look. I mean, it is important obviously to have eye contact, but then when you look towards your destination rather than at the person, you can kind of sometimes pour out more.
And so, I mean, talking of pouring, alcohol has many failings.
Yeah,
but
of course.
It has many failings, but you look at men, emotional, opening up to one another, perhaps after a couple of beers, is not a bad thing. It may take that stimulus. It's about getting it right, obviously.
Yeah, as long as they can speak. Right. I mentioned before at the beginning of our conversation that you have been my mentor, my business mentor, a life coach and a great friend for a while now, and we had some great chats. Not always the most easy chats, but it had to be done. Do you guys? Is it important for you to have a mentor or someone you kind of you look up to, or you can speak freely? Have you got a person like that in your life?
I mean, in academia, it's sort of built into the process, but not in that rounded way that you can sort of say anything and he looks at your life in the round. But if I think of who's been a good mentor to me, it's typically people who've been supervising me or actually I've been working for as part of academia, or even if only indirectly. There's still usually a generational thing there, which has been great, and it's been essential. I think, looking back at my own career, the academic relationship can be very close in a very narrow way. You have someone who understands who you are, what you can do in the context of research, and can help bring that out of you. I mean, I'm trying to do that now for other people, and try to do it in a way which is, there was an interesting perspective on this I heard last week about how you get meaning in your own life, and it's not, or after a certain point it should not be any more about personal accomplishments or achievements, but more about being part of somebody else's story, and the emphasis being on it's somebody else, it's not you. And that doesn't necessarily bring happiness or anything like that, but it can bring meaning. And that, I think the people who I think of as mentors have implicitly or explicitly recognised that, and they have tried to be part of my story without being a major character in that story.
That's a very interesting point, but almost going beyond mentorship, but we're going back to mental health, and the conversation is often largely about some level of introspection that can then be verbalized to an other. But there's a lot to say about helping one's mental health by actually looking outwards and
Oh,
engaging more outwardly,
Yeah.
and maybe sometimes less introspection.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
rumination
Yes.
is one of the
Yeah.
the worst things you can do
Mm.
when you're trying to improve your mental health.
But sorry, that was a little bit of a dive.
No, it's
No,
exactly right.
yeah, I mean, I definitely have I have a small circle. I don't think that's uncommon, but I've definitely got one or two people that I know I can go to, that if I'm feeling down, or I'm concerned, or I want advice, that I'll go to. I don't have a regular mentor. I actually mentor more, which, talking about outward, I learn a lot through mentoring. It may not be specific to my situation, but you start to realise when you mentor lots of people that the challenges, the pains, the struggles are similar, and I can relate. And so that for me has been really, really helpful. Actually, mentoring has been a bit of an outlet for me, but certainly I like to have one or two people that I would go to and I know I can trust and have very open conversations with, often walking on the downs with a dog, or it's I think it's really important to know that those people are there, if nothing else.
If you were to mentor yourself, your 20-year-old, what would be one thing or two things you would like to say?
I'd say
You're laughing, it would be something funny.
I'd say go to Paris, learn French, and fall in love.
Oh, beautiful.
And if you can't do that, go to an evening class and learn French. Which is probably what my young self would have done, would be go to the evening class. So therefore, I'd say take more risks.
Beautiful. And you?
Yeah, it's I think it's a combination of two almost contradictory things. Don't worry so much about stuff, but also worry a little bit more about the long term, about what you want your life to be like in 20 or 30 years, but don't sweat the day-to-day stuff quite so much. And start taking the hair loss prevention stuff much earlier. Get on that while you still have.
Was the technology around at the time?
Well, look, there's the time. How about you, Paul?
I'd say I'd tell younger Paul to take his hands off the steering wheel. I think I was probably desperately trying to steer the bus in my direction, how I wanted it, trying to control life. And make everything go in a way that I just trust the process, let go and be patient. Actually, be patient. You can't have everything yesterday. Be patient.
There's like a thread between those three.
Yeah, take risk.
Don't sweat.
Don't worry.
And don't worry about control. It kind of they're tangentially kind of connected in some way, aren't they?
Yeah, I agree. I was thinking the same when you were saying that. But.
Well, you guys are very in sync. There's no coincidence you're here
It's all
together.
the
I read Anil's book.
It's all the juice.
It's all the juice.
It's all on the back page of his book. I read it earlier.
Let me top up your juices.
It's our follicles. Our follicles are communicating with each other.
Beautiful. Well, this is the Youjuice magic. Paul, are you on the red or are you on the different?
Yeah, the red's lovely.
The red is lovely. Right. Let me just pour the glass before I ask. It's going very well, huh? We're doing well, guys? Yeah?
I was just trying to hold my laugh.
You're learning a lot on this. You should be paying me for the time here.
I did wanted to interject.
You're like,
That off-camera thing, like
Yeah.
on Test Match Special.
Yeah.
Sometimes hear the producers crack up in the background.
yeah,
I like that.
I like that as well.
Yeah.
Like, I want to be a part of this. I'm enjoying myself, so that's good.
Right, John. Small Acts of Resistance. Beautiful book.
Thank you.
Beautiful stories. I actually laughed a lot, yeah. And I was also fascinated. I am fascinated how human brain works and what we come up with, and there is a lot more for me to learn through your book. What's your favorite act of resistance from the book, from your stories?
I think one of the favourites, and it's one of the ones that inspired the book in the first place, was I think it's the first story in the book, is the story about radio solidarity in Poland. So Poland in the early 80s, part of the Eastern Bloc communist regime, and solidarity, the union movement and social movement kind of just exploded. The membership was incredible. I think at one point it was like a quarter of the population were members. At a time when there was no internet or social media or anything like that, it was people literally word of mouth, people getting together. But Radio Solidarity would illegally broadcast, and they put like a radio mast and a cassette would play, so that the authorities would eventually triangulate and find where it is, and then they'd arrest the cassette, but no human being would be arrested. But because they had to change their frequencies frequently, they didn't know how many people were listening, because it was all word of mouth. And so one day they decided to have an experiment where at a certain point in the program they would say, if you're listening to us, turn your lights on and off. And this was, I think, a cold winter's day, dark in Warsaw at night. And the dissident that we spoke to and interviewed, who told us this story, said he was a social worker at the time and working with unions. And he said, everyone felt kind of isolated. You were worried about secret police. You didn't know who was with you and who was against you. And the aim of the regime was to make you feel separate and isolated and not communicate and not feel a sense of solidarity. So he said he was walking in this dark night along the tenement blocks, and he saw this apartment block on the ground floor with the light flashing on and off. So he kind of looked at it, and then he stepped back and he realised that the whole block was flashing on and off. And then when he looked down the street, he realised the whole street, the lights were flashing on and off. And apparently people said if you were in high-rise blocks, Warsaw looked like a giant Christmas tree that night. And so they were able to see, people felt confident, because you could have been doing it by yourself and then the police would have known it was you.
Yeah.
You're someone who's listening. But everyone felt confident. They felt somewhat safe in a very difficult environment to show that they were all on the same side. So I thought it was just clever. It felt kind of inspirational. So that's, I think, one of my favourites.
It sounds very Polish, and I was born in 1985, but I remember my parents telling, they were telling me about the communism and how restricted they were and how they were finding ways of basically fighting the system in a fun way, not in a heavy and violent way. But yeah, that story, I have heard that story before, but it's beautiful, how you described it.
And the television one, just very quickly.
Yes, the television, because
it's the second one that inspired the book, which is people didn't want to listen to the propaganda of the evening news. So in this small town in Swidnik in Poland, they decided, there was a boycott, but no one knew anyone was boycotting the television news, because you can't know that someone's not watching the news. But a small town in Poland called Swidnik decided they were going to go for a walk during the news. So the whole town went out, but some people decided to take their televisions with them in wheelbarrows, in prams and stuff like that. So it was very obvious to everyone that they were boycotting the television news.
Yeah.
And so then the curfew was brought forward so that they had to stay at home for the 7 o'clock news, but then they just boycotted the 5 o'clock. Wow. So it was like kind of, funny ways of showing your resistance. Yeah.
Beating the system.
Yeah.
Beating the system.
Always. What was the impact of those small acts of resistance?
Well, so there is kind of a theory with social movements, and actually I think even to some extent in science, where small changes can affect complex systems. They can have quite a big effect. And in situations where you've got an authoritarian government or a dictatorship, one of the most difficult things is to build a broad-based movement of resistance, because people are separated and they don't trust, and there's there's a level of kind of atomization that's intentionally created by the regime. Those kinds of actions make people realize there is like-minded people, that actually a significant proportion of people in your own community and in your own city and in your own region and in the whole country actually share your point of view, and you need the confidence to know that there's those numbers with you and behind you to eventually get to a tipping point where you then, when you see that moment where a dictator statue is being pulled down in some city somewhere, you don't see all the backstory of all of those small acts of resistance that led to that moment.
And it often happens very quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah.
When it's happening.
When
it
it's
seems
happening.
like it's
Yeah.
But the first example, I think, is really fascinating for that, because you said that the people flipping the lights on and off must have felt safe enough to do that, which means that basically they must have known or had the confidence enough other people would be doing that too, which means they also know that those other people would also know that there are going to be a lot of other people doing that in a weirdly recursive way, which means you exactly have that self-reinforcing evidence that you know that everybody else knows that there's a lot of people now, which that's beautiful.
And it could start like a ripple, because you might just do it. You might do it in a way where it could be mistaken for you. You've got a dodgy light bulb, right? But just to see and then if you see other people doing it, and then it kind of cascades. You know, So those are my favourites, I think.
So from all the stories and the experiences, have you learned to resist some things and play your own act of resistance?
Keep the lights on and off in your house.
Now you are a married man, so
no one
please.
follows me. No one joins me in doing it. That's the thing.
I'll join you.
And I can walk around.
This will take our televisions out.
Dads unite in switching off lights across Brighton.
Well, that's a good one.
Yeah. Are you asking me whether I've learned?
Is there a little act of
well, I mean, the most recent act of resistance, which I guess is a very, very, very small one, in relation to the reason why I did it, is my wife and I changed all of our bank accounts, to a new kind of challenger ethical bank, and we left the bank that we left. Or I don't want to go into politics. But we left the bank that we left because of its investment in a particular weapons industry.
Okay.
And we did it because we knew there was going to be a few thousand other people doing it on exactly the same day.
Ah, okay.
Well,
that's pretty direct link.
Yeah.
Well, we need
but I won't say any more than that because
about. Thank you. Right, Paul. I thought I'd do a bit of adventure.
Question time.
Question time. I know you on the professional capacity as well, and I always looked up to you as a boss. You've run several teams, so sometimes we had, drinks even together with some fun evenings with the members of your team. What really comes across very, very strong to me when I look at you as a boss is that you are very, very compassionate, and you were very focused on the equal treatment among your teams, and you had a great mix of people actually working for you, and I'm sure you were also very mindful when it comes to the pay gap, what probably didn't exist in your company, because it felt to me like people were treated very equally, and you are the driving power behind it. What makes you so compassionate as a boss? Did you have an experience, maybe in the younger years, where you felt like things have to change?
I do think the workplace. Thank you, first and foremost. Thank you. That's very kind. I do think the workplace is a strange place. I think people turn up with a new coat on, a new suit, a new identity, and this persona comes out, and I just don't understand it. I think the workplace forces that. It forces people to compete. It creates quite an unnatural and unhealthy, sometimes healthy competition, but I think it's not very real or realistic or honest. And I always felt that it was wrong. I worked for some very large companies many years ago, and the culture was very strange, and then kind of raged against the big company machine and worked for myself for many years, and probably a little bit, I always thought I was unemployable because I've been working for myself in ways that worked for me. I built a very early company, 100% distributed team in 2006, because I wanted to bring the best skilled people I could, but I couldn't afford to hire them full time, so they were all consultants, and we built this network. and everyone worked from home, and we worked in a cafe that had the internet, and we used Skype. If anyone remembers Skype, where Dropbox I think had just started. So I'd always raged against the machine a bit. The large corporate environment that forced you to wear this outfit, act in this certain way, use this kind of language. I thought it was BS. I really didn't like it. And I think when you are honest with humans, and that they can be honest back, you're more productive. That you get the best out of people if you treat them as humans. And I think the workplace has lied to many of us, to lots of us, that you know, it's not served us. We've been slightly slaves to the system, and I just think being human, I think, is really important in the workplace. And really nice perks we used to get. You know, I think the company you're referring to was a great business, and I certainly don't take credit for what we did there. There's some great people around me with really good ideas. We used to get juices delivered every day,
and food
for the teams, and you know, we knew that putting wellness front and centre, because we were asking a lot of people, was the right thing to do. You know, make people. For some, it might have been the only health they were having. You know, they were perhaps in the pub that night and not eating as healthy, but we were putting it in their way, and people really enjoyed it. So yeah, I think treating people as humans and as you'd like to be treated, I think has been really important for me.
You certainly have educated quite a few people about the health and the well-being, you know, within your body. So yeah, thank you for also promoting Youjuice in your educational program.
But that's, I mean, just to pick up on one thing there, I think it's interesting that, of course, there's no one thing that is the workplace, right? And I think one thing I've noticed in university settings and academia is that it has a lot of problems. I mean, there's an insane amount of pressure in academia. You know, it's very, very hard to get a permanent job. You have very little control where you might end up living. There's huge pressures to get grants and all this stuff. But the one thing it typically, well, I don't know, at least in many parts of academia happens, is that it doesn't change someone into a different person. In my experience, my group and many of my friends and colleagues, research groups as well, it's pretty much the same person whether you see them at work or in the pub in the evening. And that's I think that's one reason that it appealed to me. I remember when I was finishing my first degree, there was this kind of, they called it the milk round, so lots of companies would come to sort of show what they were doing to the final year undergrads, and they were all like the big companies now, and I was doing science, so there's a lot of companies come, and it just didn't make any sense to me. It was like, I don't know, like I this sounds like you want me to be somebody else. So that gave me a very early aversion to the workplace, I think, because I just didn't want to be different, and than how than the trajectory I was already on. Which is not to say that there are workplace practices in the university it's not to say everything is benign, far from it. There's plenty of things that need to change as well.
Yeah.
And that actually brings me to you then, and question for you, Anil, which was originally different. You're lecturing. How and you've seen, you know.
I thought you were going to ask me whether men's brains and women's brains are different.
I want to ask that, but
Okay.
we've covered it.
Oh, no?
But I would ask you that question. But do you feel like by teaching the younger or teaching your students or giving them the knowledge, do you feel like you're giving them a knowledge in a different way you were given when you were a student, because you've had your own, of course, I'm not just talking about the actual knowledge, but the way you pass the information on. Is there a bit more of a sort of care taken? Are you more personal?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's hugely different, to be honest. It's because it's not really about passing on information. In academia, the teaching that I do is now mainly to the sort of when it's my own time. Like a lot of
Right.
teaching I can do where I never even see the students, with things like the books and online content, different sorts of online lectures and things. So that can be teaching of the sort which is more disseminating information, because I don't have direct interaction. When having direct interaction, it's much more about, it's much more two-way. So I recognise that most people in my groups, PhD students, so they know more than I do about what they're doing. But what I can help them with is how to navigate that, how to think about, doing the right experiment, how to write. Actually, a lot of academia ends up, a lot of most professions probably end up with how well you can articulate yourself, both in spoken word or in writing of some form. And that's something that generalizes across all the different projects. But it's always a very personal relationship with each student, each postdoc. They're all different, they all have different skills. I think of them as my friends too, but I'm not sure if they think of me that way.
Well, I'm sure if they read your book,
yeah, that's the other thing. I don't know. I would never.
They get to know you quite well, because there's a lot of. As I said, I'm halfway through. I have to admit, I've read it in Sri Lanka, so after about 4 pages I was falling asleep because it was hot. But it's an incredibly interesting book, but I will actually go back to reading it from the beginning.
Fell asleep after 4 pages as a
I
quote
don't
for
think
the
that's
next edition.
I tell you the truth, like, it was hot. I was also on a deep cleanse.
So don't read on a deep cleanse, is there?
It is, yeah. Don't do cleanses and read Anil's book. It's not going to work. It is a fantastic book, and I think you've given your students also, not only the readers as well, but students, people who have the privilege of meeting you on a regular basis and learning from you. You've given them quite a good insight of who you are.
We'll see. I'm not sure they've read it. I don't know.
Well,
we'll see.
if you haven't, guys.
Can we hear the answer to his question?
Yes, I also have to say that we're in a very busy area. We have a theater, there's a gig happening, there is a movie showing next door, so that noise you guys hear in the background is quite a normal thing. This is not because of our brilliant video makers and editors haven't done their best. It's purely because the life is happening.
Life is
That's
happening.
it. Right, okay, I am going to ask you
Okay.
now that last question, yeah? What is the difference between men's and women's brain?
I think much overstated is
Okay.
the short answer. It's like there's a long history of trying to differentiate the male brain, the female brain as much as possible. Now there are going to be some differences, of course. Yeah, and a lot of these can be traced to the role of hormones in development. Developing male brain has a lot more testosterone flowing around, different things for female brain. So there will be differences. Male brains are on the whole slightly larger, but that does not mean men are smarter. It just means body sizes are generally a little bit larger for male as well, and brain size scales with body size. But in almost every case, yes, you can see a difference, but if you take a group of people and divide them up in any way, you're going to find a difference. Tall people versus short people, you're going to find a difference in the brain. The question is it a significant difference? Is it a difference that really matters? Is it predictive in general? And the answer to that, I think, it's not the area I work in specifically, but the feeling I get is the answer to that is generally no.
Can I ask, so, I hear this term about the plasticity of the brain.
Yeah.
And so therefore, there's this sense of it being kind of a dynamic, it's a thing that develops and changes with what you do and the connections that are made and stuff like that. And I saw an experiment on a TV program where they had these nannies go into a room with a little boy who I think was 18 months old but dressed as a girl, a boy that you couldn't tell what sex he was, and a girl that was dressed as a boy. And there was all of these various different toys, both gendered and kind of neutral. Yeah. And they secretly filmed each nanny as they went in with one of the children. And then afterwards they asked the nannies, what kind of toys did the child like? And the ones who had the girl dressed as a boy but thought it was a boy said, oh, he seemed to kind of like the construction toys and whatever else. And with the girl, they said, oh, she seemed to kind of like the dolls and stuff like that. And then they showed them the video. Yeah. And they didn't know that they were kind of inadvertently pushing those toys in front of the child to engage with the child. So they were choosing, but not realizing that they were choosing.
Right.
And so there was this idea within the program saying that when girls get to a certain age, they're kind of like, eye-hand coordination or spatial awareness stuff is a little bit less developed than boys, because they've been getting stuff from a very early age that helps them do that stuff. And with girls, they're getting relational toys, where it's dolls, where they're role-playing and they're having conversations. So boys' emotional vocabulary is much less developed than girls by the age of 7. Could that be...
Yeah, I think there's an important distinction which you raise here, which is differences that may exist in practice and differences in potential that exist only because they've been canalized differently in this way by giving boys and girls different environments. The truth is going to be a little bit in the middle, isn't it? So there's going to be some basic small differences, but this thing about spatial reasoning is very interesting, because that's something that typically comes up if you ask people, what's the difference? And they say, well, men have better spatial reasoning and awareness. But that I find it easy to believe that is not a necessary fact. To the extent that there is a difference, which is arguable anyway, I think if you do enough studies of it. But even if there is, it would seem to me to be likely due to different environments that have been implicitly or explicitly imposed on the different sexes. Even the colour thing, right? Of course, there was. I learned at some point that
the Victorians.
Well, they flipped it, wasn't it? So we tend to assume blue is for boys, pink is for girls, but it was the opposite way around.
Marketing changed it.
Not that long ago.
Not the essentialisms that exist within gender. It was marketing that changed it.
Yeah.
But now people will swear that girls just naturally like pink.
Exactly.
But Victorian girls didn't.
I'd love to ask the neuroscientist a question.
Go on.
It's not often I sit.
I know.
Make the most
take
of it.
advantage. That's what I say.
I read books, I don't write them. Something I'm fascinated by, and it's very relevant to here, but it's the gut-brain axis. This idea of wellness here can create positive chemicals here, and obviously we're talking about wellness and mental health. Love to get your perspective. Is it overstated? Is the gut-brain axis real? And should we be paying real attention to the gut for general health and mental health?
I think we should pay more attention. I think it's been overlooked by neuroscientists or brain scientists by the definition of the job title, focusing on the brain.
Don't go south of the river. Don't go south of the river.
But there has been this focus, on understanding the brain, also on prioritizing or foregrounding things about cognition, the mind, which are maybe less related to the body, things like language or reasoning. And going back to Descartes, Descartes, this philosopher from the 17th century, 1700s, who tried really hard to disembody the mind and treat the mind as separate from the brain, and definitely separate from the body. And there's been a slow rectifying of this state of affairs now, to people thinking much more seriously. And strands of research always have, and different cultural approaches to the mind have always taken more seriously the body, not just as this kind of meat robot to move the brain from one meeting to another, but as something that's bound up in our cognition, in our perception, and in mental health. And then the first thing is interoception. So we think about perceiving the world through our five senses.
Pause you there. We're going to change the battery.
A gastrogram, which measures the electric activity of the gut during peristalsis. The rhythm of peristalsis is slow, but the electrical activity in the gut is faster, and it seems to be coordinated with the brain. So all this is to say there is a lot going on. Researchers have only recently started paying attention to it in large numbers, and I think there's pretty good evidence that if you change the composition of your microbiome, if you look after your gut well, that has a pretty direct impact on your brain. Exactly how, I don't know, but I think there's likely to be something pretty.
But I think you've experienced that.
Have I?
by drinking Youjuice
Oh,
fast.
really?
Youjuice fast.
By drinking what?
Feeling Youjuice fast. I think that's your favorite drink.
Where do you get that from?
There's a great place, I know. Yeah, you're taking care of your microbiome. So
Yeah.
this doesn't just happen like that.
No.
This is the full-on neuroscientist, answer. But there is also a Youjuice impact, a little bit.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it feels to me when, but this is the thing with science, right? I mean, you have to kind of separate what you do personally from what you can assert professionally. And I think professionally, the impact of the microbiome, the gut on cognition, mental health, remains a potential. It has yet to be really fleshed out, but I think it will be. Personally, of course, yes, I find it very beneficial for potentially all sorts of reasons.
Yeah. Well, I love the fact that every time you come from like a long trip, the first stop is Youjuice.
Yeah.
Or the second stop maybe.
First stop is home.
Home because you bring
Go
your
home
bottles.
first.
You need to bring your bottles back. So thank you for that. And finally, a last question. We started our evening with the meal before we started rolling. So I would like to think that one day soon I'll write a book, and it will be about food love stories. So food to me is love, and that's how I express love to others. I cook a meal. It's my love language. I'd like to ask you guys, what was your most memorable or joyful food experience you've had?
Mine's pretty simple actually. It could be any day of the week, but it's sharing a table with family. It's togetherness, I think, is what food does very well. It brings people together. Doesn't matter what you're eating. Increasingly, it's hard to keep everyone around the table focused and there. And I think that's something I relish and I protect. So I would say togetherness is my food love story of family or friends, whoever it is.
That's a beautiful love story.
So mine is kind of different. I was thinking about this because you gave us this prompt to think about. So the one I came up with was actually, about 20 years ago, I was in hospital for about 3 weeks with an abdominal obstruction, and it needed surgery. And post-surgery, I was not able to eat or drink anything for, I think, a period of about 10 days. So everything was just IV and stuff and a tube or something. But I was little occasional sips of water. And at that point, the idea of food, any food, just became insanely, just so abstract and remarkable and appealing. When I finally left hospital, I did have a bit of food in hospital, but then when I left, and I remember that I got back to where I was staying, I had a boiled egg, and it was just the best thing ever. Just a simple boiled egg. I don't remember a better eating experience than that, but I don't recommend the process.
Well, but that was your moment,
Yeah.
a memory. Thank you. John?
I had a different one, but now that you've said that, it's reminded me of something that I was once on a work trip on the Thai-Burmese border, and I'd been travelling around and spending the night kind of outside in various places, and the food that we had was kind of very basic, and it was all like my family are from Burma, but I grew up in London, and so I would have cereals and stuff like that for breakfast. And so the food that I had for this 2 or 3 weeks out in these various rural villages was savoury in the morning, and often quite basic in terms of what people had. And then I got back to this town in Thailand with this British woman who was working for the aid agencies. And she had a box of Alpen and proper milk, not like UHT or kind of milk that you have in a hot country that stops it from going off, but it was like proper milk, and it was in the fridge and it was cold. And she gave me a bowl of Alpen with this cold proper milk in it, and it was almost like my taste buds had never tasted anything like it before. It was divine. So that you spurred me. Yeah.
I don't think anyone's ever said that about Alpen.
Yeah. And now I'm
Right.
addicted to Alpenvite all the time. So.
Your microbiome has changed.
Yeah.
Right, guys, thank you so much for your time and for the chat. And remember, what happens at Youjuice stays at Youjuice.
Yeah.
Apart from
Thank
this.
you.
And let me-
Apart from this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you. Bravo. Happy days.